Hello and welcome to this Grimrock modeling tutorial. Today we're going to look at the process of taking an existing model within inside Grimrock, how we can bring it into the Grimrock modeling toolkit, export it out into an OBJ format, which we then can take into Blender. We're going to edit the model and bring it back inside the game. So without further introductions, I'm just going to go ahead and start. The first thing we do is, of course, open up the Grimrock model toolkit. We're going to go to File, Open, and open up the model that we want to edit. And today I'm going to open up the temple pillar model, which is right about here, temple pillar. Open it up, and here's the temple pillar. What I'm going to do with this object is that I'm going to break it in half. I'm going to make it look like the pillar has been broken or has been crumbled. So in order to be able to edit it, I need to export it out, and that's quite easy. We just go to File, Export, and Export to OBJ model. I'm going to save it down here into a tutorial folder and simply call it Temple Pillar OBJ. I'm also going to open up another model. I'm going to open up the Temple Cave-in, which is here. Oh, I opened up the Prison Cave-in. That's not the one I wanted. Temple Cave-in here. This is the one I want. And I need to do the same thing. I need to go to File, Export, and export to an OBJ model. Save it as Temple Cave-in and simply click Save. Now we can fire up Blender. This is Blender. If you're unfamiliar with the program or how to move about and so forth, there are a lot of tutorials on the internet that explain that quite well. I'm not gonna go really deep into that in this tutorial. I'm simply going to focus on changing the pillar. So in order to bring the pillar into Blender, we simply go to File, Import, and choose to import an OBJ object. Go to the tutorial folder, click Temple Pillar OBJ, and import object. Now the pillar is inside Blender, and as you can see it's quite large, but that's okay. I'm going to edit the pillar in this size. I'm not going to rescale it in any way inside Blender. I'm going to use the model toolkit later on to scale it back into the correct size. And if we leave the pillar in this scaling, that process becomes quite easy since we know how big it was and how big it's need to get back into the game. So I'm just gonna go right ahead and start destroying this thing. So I select the pillar, I go to object mode and change that to edit mode. Now I can see the wireframe of the model, and I can go here down to my selections. I'm going to choose the face selection so I can select different faces of the model. I'm going to press the B button. B button is this multi-selection tool, so I can select these faces, but when I rotate the model around, you're going to see I did not select the faces on behind, so we click this button over here, which turns on the see-through, so now we can see through the pillar, and we can also select the faces on the other side like this. So now you see I have selected all the faces on the pillar, and I'm simply going to hit the delete key and choose to delete the faces. So now I have deleted these faces. There are some faces that got left behind, didn't get deleted, or I didn't select them. So I'm going to turn the see-through off, and I'm going to clean this up by simply selecting this. Choose to delete this face, delete the face. Also down here where we have this rock over here, there are some faces that are sticking out, and I don't want that, so I'm going to clean this up by selecting these faces and deleting them over here and over here. You can also see there are some really small faces in these corners which got left behind. We do the same thing, we select those faces and simply delete them. Sometimes it can be difficult to select them. We need to rotate the model into correct position to select these guys and simply delete them away like this. And got this guy over here like this, and now the bottom half of the pillar is done, but we need to do the same thing for the upper part. So we need to select these faces, delete them away. The reason why we're doing this is because it's much easier when we start to edit the pillar more to have a clean cut, clean edges, so there are not any faces or any polygons sticking out of our pillar. Select this and delete this. Turn the model about. There are the small guys here down there. Here, here, and this one. And the last corner is over there. These two guys. I'm having difficulty selecting it, so I need to rotate and select it like this. Now I have cleaned up the pillar, or cleaned the cut. So if we go back to object mode, we can see the object, and we can see that the lines that we are going to work with are fairly clean and smooth. So let's go right ahead and just start editing the pillar. You can see the holes we have made into the pillar, and this area over here. This is not going to look really good inside the game. So what we need to do is fill this up. We need to close these gaps, and we simply do that by going back into edit mode. I'm going to go down here to the add selection, and I'm going to start to select these edges. Select this edge, and I'm going to go here and choose to extrude. When I do that, I can pull this edge out and form a new face, just like this. I'm going to bring this face over here. Doesn't need to be precise, just bring it so it's easy to select it here, because here we have the snapping tool, and I'm going to turn on vortex snapping. The magnetic button over here is the one that turns it on and turns it off. So I'm going to go to vortex selection, select this corner, press the G button, that stands for grab the corner, and simply snap it to place over here. So now it becomes an easy game to align the new faces to the rest of the model. We're going to continue by selecting this face, go again to extrude, drag it, so we start to form a new face, drag it over like this, bring it about like so, doesn't need to be precise. Go to the vortex selection, select the corner, turn on the snapping, and pop it into place. Same thing over here, pop it into place. Now we have the small gaps over here, but you can see we have a vortex here in the middle, so this is not a straight line across, and if you look even further, you're going to see that the lines here, they are not even straight, they are bent. So if we were to drag this across like we did the others, we would get a misalignment in this area. So in order to deal with that, we are simply going to choose this edge, and we are going to extrude it, drag it out, and just drag it about halfway across like this. Bring it up so I can more easily select it. Go to the vortex selection, select the corner, and snap it down here. Select this corner, but as you can see, there is there is no vortex to snap to over here, so I need to change the option of the snapping tool to add snapping, and now we can snap this to the edge like this, and whoops. Now I can continue by selecting the edge and turn off the snap and continue with creating new faces, dragging this across right over here. Go to vortex selection, turn on snapping, back to vortex, pop this here into place, choose this corner and pop it into place. Close up this one as well, select the edge, turn off the snapping, start to extrude it, drag it here across like this, bring it up so I can more easily select the corner, turn on the snapping and boom, this corner over here snaps to the edge like this, and now we can close this lower part of the pillar by dragging this over here, select the corner, change this to vortex snapping, pop it here and pop this into place. Now we have closed the lower part of the pillar up, and then we turn our attention to the upper part of the pillar like this. I can go to add selection, simply continue. This is the same process. Drag this across like so, bring it down, oops, bring it down a little bit like this, select the corners like we did before, this one, pop this here, pop this here, off with the snapping, taking the second edge, extruding it, dragging it over here, bringing it down a little bit, turn on the snapping again, snap this into place over here, and this one over here. Now we have the small gap, that's the one that's left. Choose this over here, start to extrude it, drag it about halfway, I almost forgot. Select this corner, turn on the snapping and snap it in, change it to add snapping. Oops, it's better to select the right corner before we snap it. And snap it like this. Now I want to bring it so we'll have a fairly straight line when I continue to extrude the axis. Drag this over here, bring it down, select the corners, vortex snapping, snap this and boom. Oops. If you do a mistake like this, you can simply do undo and it will bring you back to the position you were. And now we just have one gap left to close up. So we're going to drag this here, bring it down. The reason I bring it down like this is just makes it easier for me to select the corner and and snap this into place. Go to add snapping, snap this into place, and then we can go to add selection, select the edge, turn off the snapping so it won't jump all around, continue with extruding this all the way over. It went sideways, doesn't really matter since we are snapping it. Select the corner, vortex, snap it into place, and like this. Now if we go to object mode, we can see that I have closed up the pillar, but these are new faces. They weren't there before, and that will mess up the UV mapping and mess up the texture. So the next step is to bring in the texture and correct the UV mapping for the newly created faces. So I'm going to bring the model over here. I'm going to go up here in the corner and just split my screen in half. And now I have two toolbars. I don't need that, so I'm simply going to press T. That gets rid of this toolbar over here. And I'm going to change this view to UV image editor, and that brings up the UV image editor. Go to edit mode on my model and simply select A for all the faces, and now we can see the current UV mapping of the model, but there's no texture defined. So you need to go up here into the texture button, press the texture. You can see that there has no texture been defined for this object, so we're simply going to press new. It brings up the default cloud texture, but we don't want that, so we go to the image or movie, since we are going to bring in an image. Go down here into open, and I have made a shortcut here to my assets folder, so I can click that and go into textures, environmental textures, and find the temple pillar diff. That's the correct texture I want for the pillar. Open that image up, and now we can see the texture has been opened in Blender. I go down here to coordinates and change the coordinates from generated to UV map, since we are going to UV map this texture. And when that's done, I can simply press this image icon over here. It will bring up a list of all the textures I have imported, and I have simply imported one, so I can click that, and that brings up this texture. You can see that the faces of the model seem to be mapped outside of the image, but in fact the image is tiled in every direction, so this is correct. So we can double check that by going back to object mode, go down here where we can select to view the object as with textures. We click that, and it looks to be black, but it isn't black because it's just really big. If we choose the lamp up here in this corner and we drag the lamp outside the model, I had snapping on, so it's jumping around. We can see that the texture have actually been applied, but it just looks black because it's so large that the lighting of the scene can't illuminate it all. So what I do is I simply right click the lamp and I choose to delete it, and that will just globally illuminate my scene. So now I can see all the pillar, I can see the UV maps and how the texture is being applied, and now you see the problem also. You see that the faces that we just created, they look like crap, and there's a fairly easy explanation really, since this was created newly created, and if I select these faces for you, you're going to see the problem. This whole face is just represented by one line, and that's because we selected the line and we dragged it across. So the only UV information this model has for this face is the line that we dragged across. So that's the reason why this line just takes 1 pixel and then just smears it across all the face. But luckily this can be easily fixed. So since we're working with a simple model, this is not a complex model. This is in fact just boxes. We don't need to go into the process of defining the seams before we unwrap the model. We can simply let Blender unwrap it for us. And we go up here into UV mapping, we press unwrap, and again unwrap. And that unwraps these faces onto the texture. And since it was just auto-generated, Blender took the liberty of just deciding that the big faces over here would be placed there and there, but that's of course not what we want. You can work with this in exactly the same way as you work with a 3D model. You have your selection tools over here. You can select these faces. You can press the G button to grab them and move them across. And now you see that even if I move it outside the image, it will still get some textures applied because it's tiled. But you can see we have a problem here. When we move this across, they're moving in opposite directions on the model, and that's because Blender, when he automatically unwrapped it, he made some mistakes that we need to fix. In fact, the mistakes are that this box over here is supposed to be on top. What's more, it's supposed to be rotated. So I'm going to select this box. I'm going to click R for rotate and use the numpad to rotate it 180 degrees. And then I'm going to press B again. G again to grab it and bring it over here. And just like with a model, we can turn on snapping, and we can simply snap this face to the other. So now they're back together. And if we select them both now and choose to grab them, turn off snapping and grab them, you can see that this is correct. They are now moving in the same direction, and the texture is being applied correctly. But of course they are way too big. So I'm going to press S to scale and scale them down. I'm going to place this within inside this rock like this, and now it's looking much nicer. We need to do the same thing with the smaller ones. They're over here. I'm going to select them, rotate them 90 degrees, and bring them down here. I'm going to select this face, the face that they are supposed to be next to. I'm going to scale it down so it's going to fit the face. Bring it up, scale it a little bit. We are getting there. Something like this. Doesn't need to be exact since this is a rock. It's not that complicated really. Select the other two. Do the same thing, rotate them 90 degrees. Select the face they're supposed to be next to, so we can easily see what we are doing. Bring them down to the face, and like this. Scale it maybe a little bit. Something like this. And if we go back to object mode, we can see this is looking a lot nicer. Now we have the lower part of the pillar looking quite cool. So we need to do the same thing over here on the upper part of the pillar. Go back to edit mode. Select the faces over here. These are faces that we haven't unwrapped, so we need to start by selecting them all and like this, and go to UV mapping, unwrap and unwrap again, and the same thing is going to happen. Blender is just going to take some decisions how this is supposed to be, and if we look at this now, he made a better decision. This is actually correct now, and so we can scale this into place. I'm going to place this somewhere around here in a different spot of the texture, so the bottom and the upper part of the pillar is not going to look the same or identical. Take these faces here, rotate them, select the face they're supposed to be next to, which is this one. Going to rotate this again, since if we select the faces this is supposed to be next to, like this, you can see why I rotated it back. So we're going to have this like something like this. Doesn't need to be precise. In this case it doesn't need to be precise. If we were doing a creature or a character, we would probably wanna be doing a better job at this, but this is a pillar and this is a stony texture, so like this. So now I'm gonna make this window more big again so we can see better what we are doing. So this is the pillar now in its current state. We have removed the middle section of the pillar and we have closed it up, and we have retextured the new faces that we have put on the pillar. So but this is still a little bit too clean, so we're gonna do some more things to it. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go down here to object. I'm going to choose to move this object to a new layer, so I go move to layer and simply press the second box over here, and that moves this object to the second layer. I can turn on and off the layers down here, so now I have layer 1 selected. If I click the box here, I turn on layer 2, and if I hold shift and press layer 1 again, I have them both selected. But for now I'm going to have layer 1 active, and I'm going to go back to file, import, and choose to import wavefront OBJ, and I'm going to bring in the temple cave-in OBJ. This was the other model that we exported it out in the beginning of the tutorial. It's all white, and that's because we have the texture on and there hasn't been any texture defined for this object, so we simply go to solid, and now we can see the object. Unlike the pillar model, this model is actually in 3 parts. It has the floor, it has the rubble, and it also has the stones. And the reason why it's in 3 nodes is because it has 3 different textures. If we go to the modeling toolkit again, you can see this easily if you go to material, find and replace, and you can see that this model actually has the temple pillar texture, the temple floor corpse texture, and the rock wall tile light texture. That's the reason why it's in 3 parts, so you can define different material for a different node. But what I'm interested in these rocks, which I have selected now. I'm not interested in the floor or the rubble, so I'm simply going to choose the floor and delete it, take the rubble and simply delete it. And now I'm left with these stones here. So if I turn on the second layer, I have the pillar, and now you can probably guess where I'm going with this. I'm gonna use these rocks to make like a debris around the pillar, and make it more look more believable that this pillar has in some way collapsed or has been broken. If I select the stones and I go to edit mode, you're going to see here in the UV image editor that they have already been unwrapped. That's part of the model, but there's no texture defined for them within inside Blender. These rocks use exactly the same texture as the pillar, so what I can do, I can go here into the I can go here into the texture field, and I don't need to go through the process of bringing in the texture again. I've already brought it in, so I'm simply going to press this icon over here next to the new button, and I I get the one texture I have brought into the game, which is the into the Blender, which is the pillar texture. So I can just select it and it pops up here. I go to coordinates, generate, and make them UV, just as I did the other before. And now I can select the image icon over here and apply the temple pillar texture to the rocks. So now if we go to the texture view, you can see that these rocks have already been textured and they are looking quite nice, and this saves us a lot of time. So I'm just gonna go right ahead and start placing this rock around the pillar. I'm not interested in the rocks that are hanging above, I'm interested in the rocks that are on the floor. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into edit mode. I'm going to turn on the see-through so I can select all the rock. I'm going to select these 3 rocks, and I'm also going to select this 4th rock. Then I'm going to press the P button to bring up the separation menu. I'm going to separate my selection from the rest of the model. So I go to P, separate, and separate selection. What I have done now is that I have created 2 objects out of this one. I have the stones below and the stones above. And since I didn't want the stones above, I'm simply going to press the delete key and delete these stones. So now we have the stones here on the floor, but you can see if I start to move them, they all move together, and that's not something I want. So I need to separate the stones from one another, and we do that in exactly the same way. We are simply going to select all this stone, go to the P, separate selection. We're going to separate this stone over here, P, separate selection. But these stones over there, they can be together. So now if I'm in object mode, you can see that I can now move these stones individually. You will also notice that the origin of the object, it stayed uh, where it was at the beginning of the model. So when I start deleting aspects of the model and separating, the origin never got placed in the correct center. So to fix that, you simply select the object, you go to Object, Transform, and choose to transform the origin to geometry, like this. So now I have the move tool inside the middle of my object. So I'm going to do this to the rest of the stones. This doesn't have any effect for Grimrock, it's simply easier for you to move things about if the moving tool is actually placed in the object. So I'm going to bring this stone over here, something like this. Take this stone, place it here, like this, and bring these stones something like this. I'm going to press the 7 on the numpad to go into the top's perspective so I can look directly down on this. I'm going to press R for rotate. Rotate these stones a little bit so they can come closer to the pillar. So this is looking nice. This is looking quite nice, but the area here is still a bit too clean. So I'm going to select this stone, go up here and go to duplicate object. I'm going to duplicate this stone, bring it up and take it here inside, something like this. Go to the top perspective so I can see down on it. Rotate the stone, something about like this. Bring this into an alignment with the rest of the pillar, like this. Yeah, this is looking nice. So this is the pillar. It has been broken. It has stone rubbles laying about and it's looking quite convincing. So I'm gonna stop now. I'm gonna leave this like it is, and we're going to bring this back into the game. So what we do now is that we have several objects here. So since all these objects are using the same texture, we can easily just select them all, and in the object selection go and choose join. So now we have joined all these objects together, and this is just a one object, one model. Now we can go to File, Export, and export it back out to an OBJ. I'm going to go back into my tutorial folders. I'm going to name this SX Temple Pillar Broken, like this. Down here we have some parameters for the export, and there are some things here that we need to have correct. I'm going to include the normals. We are going to include the UVs, of course, since we made changes to it. We are going to write out the material. We are going to triangulate the faces, since all games, or most games, have their models always triangulated. And I'm going to change this. I'm not going to export the objects as an OBJ object. I want to export this object as an OBJ group. So when that's done, we can simply click Export OBJ. And now the pillar has been exported. So now we can go back to the modeling toolkit. We can go to File, Import, and choose to import an OBJ model. We choose the exported model we just did, the SX Temple Pillar Broken, and we open it up like this. And you can see it's it comes really big into the toolkit, but since we didn't do any scaling to it with inside Blender, we can easily just select the main object, and I know that is when it got exported into Blender, it got 100% bigger, so 100 times bigger. So now it's an easy math for me just to do 0.01 and scale it within the toolkit, and boom, it is now scaled to the correct size as it was before. So now you understand why we didn't scale it in any way inside Blender. It has the wrong material assigned to it. So if we check what material is assigned to it, we can see it's called temple pillar diff.dds. This is something that Blender messes up. We simply need to rename this back to temple pillar, which is the material defined within the game Grimrock. So we should just say set material, and now the model is ready to be brought inside the game. There's one other thing that you should always do when you have been working on a model, and that is to click Recalculate Tangents. I'm not gonna do this because I want you to see what happens if you don't recalculate the tangents and how that affects bump mapping or normal mapping within the game. So we're simply going to go here, File and Save. I'm going to go into my testing ground dungeon. I'm going to overwrite this pillar over here and save this out. So now I have saved this model into a dungeon folder which I'm working on. So now we can go and fire up Grimrock. Here we go. I'm going to go to the dungeon editor and open up my testing ground dungeon, which is here. And you can see it's not coming up, and that's normal because we haven't defined it yet. So if I go to my objects Lua for this dungeon, these are all the objects I have defined. So I need to define this pillar as a new object. So here I have the original object Lua, which comes with the assets folder, and here we have the original temple pillar. I'm simply going to select this, copy this, and bring this into my object Lua, which is under my mod assets folder. I'm going to rename this to XX temple pillar broken. The reason why I'm always putting this ASX before my names, this is simply a prefix I use to define my objects from other objects. Other modders, they would probably at some time create a object that's called temple pillar broken. So if somebody is using my assets or is using my mods, I'm just decreasing the likelihood that he will have some kind of name conflicts or two objects which have the same name. So I simply took the liberty of choosing SX as my prefix, and you can see I placed that on other objects as well which I'm using. So SX temple pillar broken is a decoration. It's of course not anymore in the assets folder, it's in mod assets model. It was directly under models and it was called access temple pillar broken. Even though models have .models behind them, when it comes to scripts or Lua scripts for Grimrock, models are always referred to as FXB, even though the actual model, if I'm going to show you the actual model, which is in the texting ground here, models, it's called ASX temple pillar broken .model, but we still refer to it as ASX temple pillar broken FXB within inside the Lua script. So that's just something that you need to be aware of. So now I save this, I save the objects Lua, I go back into the editor and I reload this project. So now when I go ASX temple pillar broken, it pops here up. I can choose it and I can place it next to this normal pillar we have here. So now if I go into the editor and go into the game, you can see that here we have the normal pillar and here we have our broken pillar or our edited pillar. So if we move about and take a look at it, it's looking quite nice. So yeah, it's looking quite good. But remember, I didn't recalculate the tangents, and I'm going to show you what happens. You can see this black face. There's a black face here which is not looking really correct, and also you can see the details on this pillar are greater than the details on this stone here, even though they have the same texture. And that's because the normal map is not being applied to this model. This is the reason why I wanted to show you this, is so that you can spot this if you make this mistake. The light is not being calculated correctly across this model, so when I move back and forth, the whole faces seem to turn black instead of, like you can see here, only half the face is being turned black, and the shadow on the original pillar is bouncing correctly. So in order to fix this, we simply going to stop this. We're going to go back to the Grimrock modeling toolkit, and you simply go to model and choose recalculate tensions. It tells you it has recalculated the tension and bit engines across the model, across this one node. I simply choose OK, and I'm going to resave this model again over the model I have created. So now, if I reload the project and play this again, you're going to see something different happening now. You see the difference. Now the light is actually coming across, and you can see that it has greater detail. It has greater detail on. So when we are moving about the pillar like this, it looks nicer. So you can see the bump mapping being applied to the sides, and the whole side is not getting black like it used to be. You can see the details on the rock coming through now. So the bump mapping, or the normal maps, is being applied correctly now. So, well, that's it. I hope you have learned something from this. I hope you have enjoyed this, and if you have any questions, or if you have something you want answered, please visit the Grimrock forums, grimrock.net modding forums. There are a lot of guys there in the community that are answering questions for people that want to start modding for Grimrock. So please come by and check it out. And yep, that's it for now. Thank you.